All right, and could you go to the next slide? Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Husky with 3C Ren. I have started this recording for the course, which will be posted on 3C Ren's on demand page. We are all here today to talk about home assessments for decarbonization with Ann Edminster. Before we get going, I just have a few slides to run through. Next slide. We ask that everyone make sure they're on mute throughout the duration of the course. If you would like to verbally participate, please raise your hand in the participant section, and we will be sure to call on you and ask that you unmute yourself. We encourage everyone that has any questions to put them in the chat box as well. I also have a poll to help us gauge who is in attendance this morning, and I will go ahead and launch that right now. Okay, next slide.
Oh.
A few words about who we are. We are the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, also known as 3C Ren. We are a collaborative partnership between San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties, working to improve energy efficiency in our region by offering free programs and services for building professionals and households. 3C Ren is funded by ratepayer dollars, which are collected through the public goods charge found in our utility bills. You may see a few 3C Ren staff members on the call today. If you see anyone with this background, feel free to chat with them directly with any questions you may have. 3C Ren currently offers 3 programs. Next slide. Thank you. The first one is the Energy Code Connect program, which serves building professionals by offering Title 24 support for everyone from plans examiners and inspectors to architects and contractors. Within the Energy Code Connect program, we offer our Energy Code Coach service with over the phone, online, and in the field support for Title 24 related questions for both residential and non-residential. We have our home energy savings program, which incentivizes contractors and helps residents save money and make their homes healthier with energy efficient upgrades through incentives and rebates. And through the end of this year, December 2022, our multifamily rebate is up to $1,500 per unit. And another program that we offer is our building performance training, which serves building professionals such as architects, engineers, contractors, and real estate professionals by offering technical and soft skill trainings related to building science principles, high performance buildings, marketing, and communication techniques. And with that, I'll close the poll. Then I'll share the results. And I'd like to introduce Ann to walk us through home assessments for decarbonization. Welcome, Ann.
Thanks, Sarah, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this class, which is the final one in the High Performance Fundamental series, Home Assessments for Decarbonization. And in case you're wondering what exactly that means, we will certainly hope to explain that through the course of this class. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of sort of setting expectations about the background that you all bring to this class, because we would love to be addressing a range of experience with the High Performance Fundamental series. And so we do anticipate that anyone who's managed to get themselves here today has some knowledge and experience with buildings and systems. Ideally, you will have already participated in the first 5 classes in the High Performance Fundamentals series, although that is not necessary, but it will certainly give you a great foundation for what you'll hear today. You may or may not have deep background in high performance building work yourself. But again, if you've gone through the high performance fundamental series, you at least have, I think, an excellent grasp of what that field represents. In working with prospective clients, the idea is that you may not be able to do everything that they are interested in accomplishing with their homes, but that you'll be able to guide them in sort of crafting a roadmap for themselves. And in doing so, you'll clearly identify what you can and what you cannot do within that scope. And things that you can't do, you will assist them in identifying other professionals who can. So that's just kind of a context piece, and then we'll move on to the actual content of the presentation. So I've got 5 segments to the agenda today. After the introduction, we'll move on to establishing homeowner goals and expectations, what you need to investigate and document in the process of working with the homeowner, recommending and prioritizing solutions, and then providing resources. Shoot, I had a stray thought I wanted to add here, but it'll come back to me. And then in terms of the resources, I wanted to mention in advance that this slide deck in itself is a resource. It includes numerous links to other resources. You'll be getting a copy of this PDF after the class with all those live links. You'll also be getting a homeowner questionnaire and existing condition checklist. This is a single document that includes both those items. And then another document, which is a resource directory. It includes a lot of the resources in the closing slide sequence, but also gives a brief explanation of why each of those resources is included and what you'll find there. So as we go along, don't be worried about taking a ton of notes or, oh, where was that thing again? Or I wish that slide were up longer, because you'll be getting all of that later on. Okay, moving on to the introduction. You'll see this goofy little nose here over at the left. This is to represent the fact that my career has been a function of following my nose, as my mother used to say. So I started out in architecture school, got myself a degree in architecture, worked for a number of years, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years or something, doing mostly residential remodeling for a variety of clients with a whole range of different needs. And every house was different. So I learned a lot about how houses went together. And I've always been more interested in domestic architecture than anything else. So this suited me really well and set me up for next stages of my career. But along the way, I was really troubled by the waste in my industry and some other concerns that arose in those early years of my working in architecture, learning about things like sick building syndrome. All of that led me back to grad school. So this is a aerial snapshot of UC Berkeley, where I did my master's work, where I focused on green building, which wasn't really even called green building yet at that time, but I chose to focus on energy, materials, and once again, residential architecture and sort of how all those fit together. During that time, I became really captivated with natural building methods. This is a snapshot of a straw bale building, one that I actually helped to build in those early days, the early 90s. But at a certain point, I realized that the whole world wasn't going to be, have homes built with straw bales. They're just too big and bulky to work in urban settings. And with an urbanizing population, we needed to be focusing more on how we made mainstream construction more environmentally sensitive, reducing all the negative impacts. So that led to me working for quite a number of years for the Natural Resources Defense Council. I started with them working on wood use issues because of concerns about deforestation, and wrote this book, Efficient Wood Use in Residential Construction, back in 1998, a long time ago. Following that, I was recruited to work on the development of the Lead for Homes program for the U.S. Green Building Council. And that really broadened my both my knowledge and my circle of acquaintances, and certainly depth of understanding about all facets of green building. It was tremendously valuable experience. And once the Lead for Homes program launched, I asked myself, okay, what's the next most important thing to work on? And for me, the answer was clear. It was climate. And that was back in the 2008-9. And at that time, we were still using energy as sort of a proxy for climate in buildings. So I wrote this book, Energy-Free Homes for a Small Planet, which was published in December of 2009. And since then, I've been increasingly involved in education for the industry as well as for homeowners. So that led me through a long and winding path to working with my colleagues at 3C Ren, who have been tremendous partners in developing a lot of educational content. And one of the realizations of late has been, as the state makes its shift to addressing climate more and more aggressively, there's going to be more and more call for building professionals across occupations, whether it's trades, architects, engineers, energy raters, everyone sooner or later is going to be facing questions from their clients. What do I do to get the carbon out of my home, out of my lifestyle? So essentially, that's what brought us to this point today. So working with the 3C Ren team over the last couple of years, we've developed this high performance fundamental series, working on the premise that, again, building practitioners, broadly writ, will need, and hopefully soon will want, if they don't already have it, a solid grounding in building science. And what that will enable them to do is to more holistically look at the design and construction of buildings to produce better results that will in turn both reduce greenhouse gas emissions while also improving comfort, resiliency, and efficiency. So that's kind of why we're doing what we're doing. And the result of that is this high performance fundamental series, or HPF, again, classes 1 through 5, which probably you've already encountered or at least heard about through 3C Ren promotions. And this one, the culminating class, ties it all back to the state's climate goals. And again, the notion that every homeowner and some home residents, but perhaps that don't own their homes and will try to influence landlords, will be wondering, what does it mean to decarbonize and how will I go about that? And many of you are likely to be asked to assist in that process at some point in the foreseeable future. In addition to the class series 1 through 6 that you just saw outlined on the screen, there are other elements that we're talking about developing to really enrich this program and enable participants to go much farther with this set of concepts. First of all, we're going to be offering a formal certificate of completion that will allow anyone who's taken all 6 classes to demonstrate to an employer that you have acquired this fundamental knowledge that's very important. And we've heard from many, many stakeholders in the industry that they wish more of their prospective hirees had this background. Secondly, we're looking to develop supplementary content that is in the field to, again, give a lot more direct experience with the hands-on components of this type of work, again, across a variety of occupations, whether or not you, for instance, anticipate operating a blower door yourself, as shown in the photograph on the right. It'll be really important to know how that works, what information it yields, and why it's important. And also a set of mentorship and or peer learning opportunities that will really support learning, not just in the classroom, not just on the job site, but through exchanges with other folks who are working this field. Because we all learn from each other. And as much as you may learn or have learned already, there's always more, and it's a rapidly changing field. Very exciting field to be working in. So why is decarbonization part of high performance fundamentals? I looked around for good definitions of high performance buildings. Like, what do we mean by that? There were a bunch of them out there, but this one honestly stood head and shoulders above the rest from my perspective and the background that I come from. I've worked with Building Science Corporation for a couple of decades or more and have enormous respect for the pioneering work that they have done, including a ton, which is in the public domain because it's been funded through the US Department of Energy under the Building America program, among others. So Building Science Corporation, buildingscience.com, I should have included their URL, is an amazing resource. I haven't actually included that as a link, but would certainly encourage all of you to go to their website and just browse around, particularly the nerdier among you. I know there are some nerds out there. Okay, so a building performance high performance building has these characteristics. It's exceeding conventional building performance in the areas of energy, durability, comfort, safety, and indoor air quality, and as indicated at the bottom, sometimes accessibility and occupant productivity are also included in that definition. But I really like this set of 5 bullets because I think those really hit the key things. And the big red bubble in the middle shows why I believe this belongs as part of the high performance fundamental series. Decarbonization, these are all very synergistic with decarbonization. So in my mind, we can't consider decarbonization without considering high performance as a companion goal and process. So a little bit about those synergies. When we switch from gas to electricity, if we don't address performance, high performance, we're missing these opportunities. We're missing the opportunity to reduce the necessary size of heating, ventilating, and cooling equipment that we need. We're spending more money than we have to buy that larger equipment. We're also committing our clients to eternally higher utility bills than they otherwise would have. And we've failed to resolve potential comfort issues, indoor air quality deficits, and condensation risks that may exist, and in fact do exist in many, if not the vast majority of existing homes. So this is a really important opportunity not to overlook. That said, we won't be able to resolve everything. Existing homes are complicated creatures. So what this class will set you up to do is give you a little process framework to walk through the mapping process with homeowners to create an electrification pathway. We won't be delving deep into details of all these steps. It won't answer all the questions. So it won't make you an expert, but it will help you meet your client's electrification needs, whether directly yourself or by, again, setting them up with this map of what to do next. And it will help you identify other resources, not just information sources, but people who can help the homeowners complete their projects. So setting off on that question, well, when will decarbonization, is this a tomorrow thing? Might be yesterday thing for some of you. But I think it's worth noting that there are more than 60 local jurisdictions just within California that have already tackled decarbonization of new construction. And the vast majority of those are already looking ahead and saying, okay, how do we begin to decarbonize our existing homes? So the majority of the existing housing stock. I was just looking at a notification through one of the listservs I participated in this morning about there are, I think, a dozen events, meetings of local jurisdictions just this week that are looking at these issues, either advancing their new construction ordinances or beginning to look at what opportunities they have to decarbonize existing homes. So this is an incredibly active field and rapidly changing. So if it's not already come your way, this may very well be a tomorrow thing with a new client. And then it's also, I think, significant to know that as of January 1st, the new version of Title 24 goes into effect with a number of new measures that, again, are moving more towards decarbonization. So this is an inexorable movement that we're dealing with. This is, I suppose, the Borg comes to mind. Resistance is futile. So you can get ahead of it, you can become an expert, or you can drag your feet. And I'm sure you're all here because you're wanting to get ahead of it. So that's great. And again, a lot of this comes from the fact that California has really stepped out with some pretty forward-thinking commitments, 100% zero carbon electricity by 2045 latest, by the way, and a similar economy-wide carbon neutrality also by 2045 at the latest. So among other things, this means that natural gas is really on its way out. The biggest component of natural gas is methane, which is a greenhouse gas that on a 20-year time frame is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So although we often talk about decarbonization, carbon emissions, we're really using that as a shorthand for all of the global warming impacts associated with burning fossil fuels. So methane is a big component of that too, and also has other impacts that we'll touch on briefly here. But suffice to say that outdoor emissions aren't the only problem. We also have line leaks that make gas as polluting as coal. Household gas appliances are implicated in a number of respiratory problems, as well as other health and safety risks. So we have strong reasons to be moving towards electrification. And I think there are also great reasons professionally for looking at your future as being electrifying, double meaning intended. So we're seeing very fast changes happening, as I indicated with the local jurisdiction movements. There's an opportunity to really specialize in decarbonization, too many syllables. And some firms are beginning to do that already. And those firms are incredibly busy. And they are offering those who are moving towards that specialization the opportunity to really focus on good work, making your clients' homes healthier, more resilient, and safer, as well as more planet responsible. So it's exciting to see these new business models emerging, and it takes some courage to step out and attempt that. But as I said, everyone I know who's working in this sphere is pedaling really, really fast. And many have months and months of advanced demand for the services they provide. So now, why are clients asking for this? Certainly, a lot of the front runners, the early adopters, are driven by the mission. They're very concerned about climate change, whether it's looking to what their families are facing in the future or globally. So even, single people who have no children, no prospect of grandchildren ever. It's all about the planet. It's about other species. And of course, with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act recently, all of a sudden there's a lot more money available in this space. So this is an admittedly extreme example, but for income qualified households, it's very conceivable that in a little bit more than a year, there may be as much as $55,000 available for some households, and smaller amounts for many, many households. So well worth looking ahead, not just to what you might be able to do in the next 12 months, but even on a longer trajectory, and working with clients with that expectation and making sure you're pointing them to all of the opportunities to make these changes more affordable than they would have been a short time ago. Okay, so that's the intro. Now we move into this process framework. first of all, working with homeowners. So I think that it's really important to find out what your clients want. In the early stage of my career, I worked with 100 and change different households. And there was a lot that I learned through that. One of the big lessons was what they will tell you, the reason they called you, isn't necessarily everything that's on their mind for their home. And sometimes what they fail to tell you can create problems or lost opportunities for them in the future. So I like to make sure that I get a really comprehensive picture, even if a lot of it may be outside my scope. If I understand their longer term plans and the full range of issues that they encounter in their home, I'm going to do a much better job helping them create that roadmap. So a lot of these don't sound like decarbonization. Well, we really want the house to be nicer. Nicer is shorthand for a whole lot of different things. So it's good to ask questions like, well, where do you find the house is less than you might wish it to be in the future? So just get a really open-ended sense about that. And also, what needs to be fixed? I have yet to encounter a home that's been lived in for any amount of time where there's something that doesn't need to be fixed. So whether it's dated, which is arguably not broken, it's not a fix, but in a lot of people's mind it is, because they're uncomfortable with sort of the aesthetic, as well as certain functionality, comfort, and broken stuff, certainly. Utility bills, important to a lot of people, not so important to other people. Greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously, this is a whole mixed bag, but it's really good, again, to put them on the table. And again, the big reason is the bottom line on this screen, really the bottom line, building systems interact. And so if you don't know what all they might be contemplating, you may miss some interactions that are really critical. So it's also important to make sure that everyone who is involved in decision making is part of the conversation. So this is a little dialogue that I've seen played out over many variations and many, many households. Again, one party in your client household may say, yep, this really isn't my project, just talk to my partner because I'm too busy to be involved, or, I don't really care. I'm kind of oblivious to things around the house. Don't believe it, because next thing you know, 6 months later, 6 weeks later, you might find them saying, oh, but this is something that really bothers me, or no, I didn't want that. So it's really important. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've found that households are not always on the same page with one another as to what they want or how important something is to them. So be sure that you do hear from all of them. And then again, prompt for things that are specifically high performance issues, but that may not occur to them. People often view their homes sort of like their pets. They think they have personalities that they don't really have much influence over, but you know better. So ask them about these issues. Okay, so that's all set up. And then we move on to the decarbonization nitty gritty, the crux of the biscuit, as an old friend of mine used to say. So when we talk about decarbonization, we're definitely going to be asking about what we call the big four appliances. And these are items that generally or very frequently in California mixed fuel homes are run on gas. So space heating, water heating, clothes drying, and cooking appliances, very commonly run on gas in California, not the same all over the country. So also find out if there are any other major electric items that are either already part of the home or are planned for the future. Because if you're going to be planning around electrification, then these are going to matter to the overall picture. So then we want to set expectations with clients. So we're going to go over the benefits of electrification, of course. there are potential challenges, and you're going to want to be able to address those potential challenges. Some people may say, well, I'm worried that if I electrify my cooking, I won't be able to cook in a power outage. Now, I'm not going to talk you through the solutions to that today, but there are tons of great classes being offered all over the state now and beyond about all the ins and outs of electric cooking and how to address those types of issues. So you're going to want to understand them, be able to communicate them effectively. Whatever their challenges they may raise, you want to be able to respond to effectively. Ask about budget and timeline. I found a lot of clients don't really want to be candid about their budget. That's not good, because if they're not candid about their budget, then it's going to be very hard for you to understand to what extent you can help them pursue their goals or do so effectively. And again, I've learned this lesson through painful experience. So I don't let clients not give me an answer, and I write down the answer. So if things change later, I can say, oh, that's interesting. This is what we talked about when we started. Similarly with timeline, that's not quite as critical, but it's really helpful for you to understand any time sensitivities. So my stepson and daughter-in-law recently bought an older home and knew that they were going to change out the kitchen. And there were other changes they wanted to make. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law got pregnant and time became a real issue. So I managed to get them to get an induction stove. They're very happy with it, I am pleased to report. I wasn't so successful encouraging them to look at the heating and cooling system, because they really needed to focus on the kitchen and get that done before the baby arrived. That happened by the skin of their teeth, which is a miracle to my daughter-in-law's persistence and charm with the building professionals she was working with. But lo and behold, during the summer, the horrible heat spell, they were miserable because their cooling system is an abomination. So just, timeline matters. Obviously, you can't always achieve the ideal, but it's helpful to know what you're dealing with. Okay, and I already went over the question of understanding everything they want done within that time and budget. So even if they've picked you because they're interested in decarbonization and that's something you might help with, again, understand the whole scope and how your scope fits within a larger scope. And then finally, explain how you work, what you're going to do, what you're going to deliver for them, and what your timeline is as well. And again, looking at the building systems interaction issues. Okay, very important step, should not ever be shortcutted. Don't ever just let the homeowner say, this is what I want, and walk away, and you go, okay, great, not good enough. All right, so then we move on to your investigation of the home and documenting what you find. And again, I'm going to continue to emphasize this. You want to be really clear about which parts of the scope are and are not within your skill set. So do a walkthrough of the house and just note everything you find. This is just a really quick checklist. Again, I've provided a checklist handout that's got a little bit more detail than this, but it's really just more a set of prompts. It's your eyes and ears and brain at work, and just being very observant as you go through to note what you see. And this might include things that your clients didn't bring up. So it's just a very comprehensive walkthrough of any performance type issues. In particular, you want to look at the electrical panel. You want to do your best to figure out what the situation is now in terms of the panel capacity, any available breaker areas. The delivered amperage might be different from the panel rating. Now, this is something that you're probably not going to be able to tell just by looking at. So if there's any suspicion that less amperage is being delivered than is indicated by the rating of the box, you may want to get an electrician involved sooner than later. Now, one clue of this might be if there are a lot of open breakers. But again, this is not something that you're going to be able to tell, just make an observation about it. Okay, then you're going to want to look at these specific locations of items that are going to be replaced, gas items are going to be replaced with electric, and find out what kind of electrical outlets there are. Now, not every replacement electric item might need a 240 volt outlet. There are 120 volt outlet options available for heat pump water heaters. Soon, we are being told that we're going to see kitchen ranges or cooktops on the market at 120 volt options. So not necessarily today, but in the future. And I believe there may also be a dryer, or perhaps it's a combo washer dryer option that's 120 volt option. So, but be aware of what's there, document it. Okay, and then add up, the load needs for new items. So this isn't, obviously this is a fairly lengthy list. Not all of these things may be part of the plan, so your total is going to vary by project. And this is, again, recognize this is just a preliminary. So unless you're an electrician or doing the actual work, this will be an estimate. Now, depending again on the scope of the project or how many things you find that cause you to scratch your head during your walkthrough and observations, it may be helpful to gather some other relevant information. And, it's a pretty simple list here of what to look for and where you might find it. Oftentimes, there is no other information. So your observations are kind of what you've got initially. Some specific things to look for in the walkthrough, if space conditioning is part of the electrification plan, is thinking about, well, where might we put a heat pump for space heating and cooling? Is a ducted or an unducted system going to make the most sense? Again, you may not be able to answer this question. It's a question to ask yourself as you look around. Do you find ducts? Where are they? What kind of condition are they in? Do they look a little sketchy? Do you think they should be tested? Is there an opportunity to put an air handler within conditioned space? If you don't have an air conditioner now and you're going to have a unit outdoors, is there space outdoors for that unit? So take a look both indoors and outdoors when you're thinking about the space needs or other needs related to space conditioning heat pumps. Heat pump water heater also deserves a sharp eye to thinking about where it might go. Oftentimes, a heat pump water heater will be larger, somewhat larger than an existing even tank water heater. And the critical thing for heat pump water heaters is enough space to provide effective airflow, because they're doing an air exchange with the space in which they're installed. So if space is constrained, think about what the options are. Different models have different specific space needs. Can the space be made larger? Can it be vented? Is there a different location, for example, than where the existing water heater is? And depending on the location that you're considering, the noise may be an issue. They do make noise when the compressors are operating. Some units are noisier than others. I have a unit that's not particularly noisy. I was just visiting a friend and colleague this past weekend and saw his water heater, and when it was running, it was quite noisy. So there are differences. You're going to need to think about all that and perhaps work through some of those issues with the clients. Now, another thing to look for is opportunities to reduce demand, so that, again, we're not going to be putting in space conditioning equipment that's larger than it might need to be otherwise. Some of the easiest opportunities to reduce demand are to replace dated lighting and appliances. There are some great resources on this page for locating best in class. My particular favorite is the one shown at bottom right, which is the marketplace.pge.com This is run by PG&E, but it's runs on an engine created by Energy, which is a company that created this whole system where you get a numeric score for performance efficiency. 100 is the highest available and ratchets down. I always recommend starting by looking for items that are 90 and above. And if you don't find what you need, you can always go lower. But you can see they also provide information on the site showing potential rebates available, cost range, and you can also do things like use their search engine to put in space constraints. So if you need a smaller than usual or some weird size for a particular appliance, you can search on those type of parameters as well. So lots of great resources here. Again, these links will be available to you after class. More opportunities to reduce demand. Working on enclosures is certainly more, generally more expensive, more complicated, requires more effort on the part of the client, and maybe in some cases more disruptive to the household, depending on what may be needed. But good idea to look at what these opportunities might be. So you're going to be particularly interested in insulation issues, air sealing issues, and whether or not testing, various diagnostic testing, can be helpful in determining whether there are these issues in spaces that are not directly visible. So have a look around at the enclosure. Another important part of the enclosure, of course, is windows, and windows can also have a tremendous impact both on thermal performance and comfort, also on architecture. So rarely do people tackle a substantial remodeling project purely motivated by decarbonization. They usually have something else in mind too. Often it's architectural improvements, and windows are often a place where you can yield great improvements in all of those parameters. So they're definitely worth raising, particularly if you find that there are some older windows, aluminum frames, single glazing, kind of leaky. So definitely worth looking at. Not the cheapest thing you could ever do, but can have very, very high benefits yielded, both energy benefits and comfort benefits and architectural improvements. So a lot of this depends on your client's sensibility. On the right, I've shown an NFRC, National Fenestration Rating Council, window label, and highlighted the two arguably most important performance parameters shown on that label, the U factor and solar heat gain coefficient, or SHGC. So you always want to look for values that are appropriate to your climate. In the resources that I've provided on the final slides, you'll find a little more guidance on what those values might be if you're not already familiar. Shading windows can also be very, very important in climates, well, and that's these days, most of California that at least occasionally experience extremely high temperature and cooling demand. Even more important if there's not cooling in the home and isn't going to be. If you install a heat pump, you will get cooling along with it. Nevertheless, that's not going to be in everybody's future, or not immediately. So worth looking at opportunities to provide shading. Exterior is most efficient, but when exterior shading is prohibitive, whether just logistically or cost-wise, there are interior window coverings that do provide some benefit from a shading perspective. And there's a link here at the bottom left to find out more about that. Okay, other opportunities to look at. These are certainly, water features are not the most common thing, but nor are they tremendously uncommon. And when they are heated, they are often heated with gas or propane. So these are decarbonization opportunities that should certainly be looked at if there are pools or spas or other significant water features on the site, or if they're in the plan. Now, there's an important caveat here. Excuse me. This is arguably one of the most challenging aspects of decarbonization when pools are part of the equation. And again, I speak from direct experience working with clients who wanted decarbonized pools, that is non-gas fueled pool heating. And what I found is that the expertise on this is thin on the ground. And so if you want to accomplish this, you really are going to want to find somebody that has prior experience doing electric and or solar pool heating. And by the way, solar can do an excellent job if you're only heating during the summer. If you're intending to heat when temperatures are cooler, then that's probably not going to do the job effectively. And that's when you're probably going to want to look at heat pumps or the combination of heat pumps and photovoltaics. That current research is indicating that's going to be the most cost-effective approach. But again, there are a lot of variables that determine this: size of the pool, water surface area, volume of water, specific climate, specific intended use patterns. So this is definitely a place where I recommend adult supervision. By that, I mean deep experience in doing this work. Okay, moving on to other decarb opportunities. Some projects you may encounter, the clients may already have solar and or battery. If they're there already, that is fabulous. You want to understand what is there. And if it isn't there, it's a good opportunity to raise. And battery alone tends to be less, I'd say, beneficial sort of solution than battery in combination with solar. This is a good one to talk to vendors about, because we're seeing more and more solar vendors venture into the battery space. And that's where, honestly, the deepest understanding is about this. I will add, for those of you who don't have anything else to do this afternoon, a colleague of mine who is a battery expert is teaching a wonderful hybrid, that is in-person and online class this afternoon through Sonoma Clean Power. So if you, I don't remember, I think that class is maybe at 4 o'clock, and it's taught by Chris Caldwell, super smart guy. You can totally nerd out on batteries this afternoon. I just thought about that. I'm going to attend. I'm real excited. I've seen Chris's class before and really can't get enough of it. Okay, so moving on. So you're documenting your findings. I really recommend creating a formal report, but keeping it as short as possible. People are pretty impatient these days. They want to cut to the chase. Be sure to use simple, non-technical language. People who aren't in the building industry, we tend to forget, those of us who are in the industry. There's a lot of language that we use that is everyday for us, that is unfamiliar to our clients. Once again, clarify within your report what you can and would like to do, what you recommend being done. So these are the things that you think are very much in line with your client's budget, timeline, goals, and expectations, and perhaps other things that you suggest they might consider. Include the good, the bad, the ugly, and the real opportunities that you see, and then resources. So again, a little more detail on all these things. Take lots of pictures, by the way, when you do your walkthrough, sketches as needed, diagrams, and so forth. All this is really helpful in having your clients understand what their pathway is going to look like. Okay, so what are you going to recommend? So here's some thoughts about walking through the process of developing recommendations and priorities for those solutions. First of all, recognize that, again, what you're balancing is your own industry knowledge and experience against your client's budget, timeline, wish list. So I have to say that I've encountered a lot of folks in the building industry who skew heavily towards the client's wish list and don't necessarily share the depth of their knowledge and experience. I think this is a real mistake, because you're being hired because you have a unique skill set to bring to bear for the client. They don't know what you know. They're not going to know it unless you share it. So I think it's really important that both of these show up equally in the recommendations you provide. So you want to clearly communicate what you believe will provide the highest value and create the most satisfaction for your clients, as well as sharing what you know about the labor market and the market for products, both of which are pretty challenging right now. So again, that's part of continuing to calibrate expectations for your clients. Some of the things to factor in are appliances die. They often die at extraordinarily inopportune moments. Who among us has not heard the story of the water heater or the furnace that died right as people were planning or in the midst of holiday celebration with a whole bunch of people in their home? That's not pretty. So that's a good prod to get people to consider what I call preemptive replacement. You want to avoid those situations. So the best way to do that is to understand, well, how old are those appliances? People may or may not know the age of their appliances. I've got a couple of resources here to help you help them find the age of their appliances. And here's some averages of life expectancy and my personal thoughts about when you might want to replace. So if you've got a water heater that's 10 or more years old, I'd be looking to replace it. And part of the rationale here is doing things at the spur of the moment is going to probably cost more than doing it in advance, because when you want any kind of trade person to act quickly, you are generally going to pay a premium for that. Secondly, you may pay the same or maybe a little bit more for the item if you're lucky. If you avoid the premium, you're also avoiding more years of carbon emissions and, for example, in the case of cook stoves, more harmful emissions in the home that can have health implications for occupants. So getting rid of those things early is, I think, a wise and beneficial thing. Obviously, it's going to depend on your client's sensibilities, their budgets, and all that. Also want to mention that I have a number of colleagues who work in this decarbonization world with me who believe passionately and want to make all of these measures in their own homes and have themselves experienced these inopportune equipment failures and actually been unable on short notice to get the electric items they wanted because of challenges with the labor pool and product availability. So this is another reason to plan ahead and make these replacements before the failures occur. Okay. Also, there's some synergies in some of these load reduction strategies. Again, I can't probably emphasize enough that enclosure improvements can make it easier to do a really great job with HVAC systems, enabling smaller capacity, enhancing survivability and power outages at the same time, and also reducing future utility bills. So what's not to love about that, except the pain in the neck that may be associated with enclosure improvements, nevertheless important. And then remembering that HVAC distribution system improvements, not just the equipment, but the distribution system, can double system performance, cut demand in half, and improve comfort substantially. So, and just to be clear, when I say distribution system, usually with HVAC, that means ducts. And normally, when people think in terms of the efficiency of HVAC, they really are just thinking about what's the efficiency rating of the box, the piece of equipment. But that's only part of the equation. So that's another big opportunity to look at. Okay, something else to think about is if for whatever set of reasons, a panel upgrade seems likely to be needed, and yet a panel upgrade is not desirable. And that could be for a couple of reasons. One, there could be costs associated with it that are difficult for the client to undertake. Secondly, there can be considerable delays associated with panel upgrades or service upgrades to the home. Or thirdly, just to reduce the demand on the grid, which is a worthy goal and something that some of your clients may bring to you or you may raise with them. For any of these reasons, it may be desirable to look at some of these, what we call diet options or smart options. So the diets are sometimes referred to as a watt diet or an amp diet. It's basically looking at equipment options that have a lower power draw. So that includes some options, the condensing washer dryer option or the lower amperage, lower voltage heat pump water heaters. This is not exhaustive, by the way, and more options are being added to this menu on a pretty frequent basis. And then secondly, smart technologies. So a smart panel is what's referred to as an automatic load management system. And what it can do is it can apply an algorithm to the various things that are pulling electric power in your home so that the big draws don't overlap each other and cause you to need more amperage than your panel capacity allows. So, and there are a lot of control options available with those. So that's a good option to look at. If your needs are more simple, for example, you have two EVs and you don't have enough juice to run both of them at once, to power both of them at once, or you might have a dryer and electric vehicle that could share a circuit and the EV charging could pause, for example, when the dryer is running, then some of these simpler devices might also be helpful for your clients. Okay, some other things to look at when you're thinking of opportunities to recommend to your clients are, where might there be some other synergies? So something to look at that I've encountered is if you have vented attics and crawl spaces, if you're looking at installing heat pumps for space conditioning or ERVs, HRVs, energy or heat recovery ventilator systems that would function better in conditioned or semi-conditioned spaces, there's an opportunity to change those to unvented and conditioned or semi-conditioned spaces. Also, removing those vents makes them more wildfire safe. If wildfire smoke is a concern for a given location that your clients are living in, then they may be interested in getting a active ventilation system, so heat recovery or energy recovery. That's going to be less costly to install. At the same time, other HVAC work is being done. I've encountered projects that had siding that's in really poor condition. In those cases, I've worked with clients to say, well, let's pull off the siding. That's an expense you are going to be facing anyway. And at that point, we can do a good job of air sealing, replacing the cavity installation, and sometimes adding a continuous exterior insulation. All those measures add up to a vastly improved building enclosure as compared to what was there before. And I already mentioned the opportunities that exist with single pane windows, but also worth mentioning that when those windows are replaced with tempered glass, they improve wildfire safety. They're much more resistant to the cracking and bursting that can occur with extreme heat exposure. Okay, so now what if the project needs to be phased? Then you're going to want to try to spell out the best sequence for implementation. I want to say it's important to note my green type here over on the left. These steps will vary based on the project specifics. So this is just an example, but something you might want to work on is, first of all, of course, defining the broad scope of the project. So what all you want done at the end of all the phases. If there are any buried systems, things that are hard to get to, those are really often important things to work on first. Reducing loads by improving the enclosure, often a logical next step. At that point, you may be phasing based on budgetary constraints. So as X amount of money becomes available, one or another next step may make more sense. Sometimes, again, it might be prioritization by equipment age. So again, be sure and customize these based on the specifics you've learned about your client's project. Okay, so beyond what you personally may be able to do in terms of the actual implementation of the electrification or decarbonization scope, you want to recommend others if there are tasks that are beyond your scope. And this is just a list of folks that may potentially be useful. And I really want to emphasize the point on the right. You will only want to recommend people that you know and trust. You know something about their work, either directly from having worked with them yourself or through others that you know and trust who have worked with them directly. I always also recommend that clients check references. And there's a funny phenomenon that I've learned about references over the years, and that is a service provider may give references to a homeowner, thinking that all of these people are going to say glowing things about them. Come to find out, they don't always have glowing things to say about them. Well, why would they think they did a great job if the homeowner didn't think they did a great job? I have come to believe that this is related to something like the Stockholm syndrome, right? Where there's the captives become so fearful of their captors that they're very friendly to them. Well, when contractors invade a home, and I use the term invade advisedly, they're since the captor. Homeowners can realize that, oh my gosh, I've got all this work going on in my house. It's incredibly disruptive. There are these things that bother me about these people, but I'm afraid that if I complain, they're going to drag their feet. They're going to go work on some other project and leave mine half done, whatever the fears are. And so for this reason, the clients often just make peace with the process and try not to ruffle any feathers. The people who've done the work walk away thinking they have another satisfied client. So anyway, all of this leads to the absolute necessity of having references checked on pretty much every single occasion. Also, I have found that there have been people who've done a great job, and then for whatever set of reasons, their work may deteriorate over time. So a reference that was good 5 years ago might not still produce the same results. Anyway, long story short, this is a step not to be skipped and a warning to be shared with clients. Okay, finally, providing resources. And here are a bunch. And in the resource handout I provided you, I've again explained what each of these will do for you. I had someone question me recently, say, oh, well, the zero net energy stuff, that's kind of so yesterday, right? We're really not trying to now zero energy production and consumption on an annual basis, because that's not the whole story by any means. The reason these two particular resources are still here is because there's a lot of information in them on high performance practices. And for example, in the Zero Net Energy Builder Resource Guide on the right, which Rick Chitwood co-authored with me, he's given a lot of very specific guidance on HVAC performance metrics and parameters. Also on, there's great information from Terry Nordby, who's an air sealing expert on air sealing practices. So there's a lot of great resource information in these documents that is evergreen and not out of date as we have progressed beyond the notion of zero net energy into the zero carbon realm. So that's my wrap up of resources, and we have plenty of time for questions. So I'll be happy to take any that may have come up.
Yeah, Anne, if you could just go to the next slide. I'd like to run through just my closing so that we can open up the rest of the time for questions. We have a closing survey that I just launched. If you could fill that out, that just helps us gauge effectiveness and just provides us a little bit more information. There are AIA learning units available. So if anyone needs to provide their AIA numbers to me, my email is there on the screen. You will be getting a follow-up email soon with the slides, the recording, and also the couple of handouts that Anne mentioned earlier. We still have a few upcoming courses to close out 2022. And 3C Ren is currently working on our 2023 course schedule, which will be out very soon. So you'll be seeing that shortly. And with that, yeah, we can open it up for any questions that anyone has for Anne. You can put any questions in the chat or raise your hand and can unmute yourself. And while we're waiting for any questions, and I did actually have one.
Sure.
You had mentioned that a gas water heater has an average life expectancy of 13 years. And is there a difference between whether it's a tank or tankless?
That is a good question, and I don't know the answer to it.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
I have a tankless,
Yeah.
so I was just curious.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, you know, a lot of those numbers I found through Google searches, of course, you know, trying to find the most reputable sources, but I'm always amazed by what information I can find on the internet these days. Like, I'll ask the most goofy, specific, off the wall questions, and so you might get an answer if you put that question in.
All right, we have a question in the chat. How successful can homeowners be taking on some of these improvements themselves?
Oh, great question. Actually, I know some folks at Lawrence Berkeley Lab who work on building decarbonization are great proponents of DIY solutions. It depends a lot on the homeowners. You know, there are some homeowners who are very adventurous and will probably have a lot of fun doing some of this work. They can certainly walk through some stages of the assessment process on their own. Unfortunately, we live in a culture where working on one's home has sort of been devalued. You know, ever since World War II, we've been kind of a culture that's pushing increasingly towards white-collar jobs and hiring people to do physical work around our homes. So I find there's not a lot of how-to knowledge in the general population anymore. But I do think that as there's more interest in the general population in climate concerns, in getting involved more directly in solutions, and also post-COVID, with people spending more time at home and having more interest in their homes, that's shifting a little bit. So I think the answer is pretty small fraction, but definitely worth exploring with a client or thinking about it yourself.
All right, so I don't see any other questions in the chat. Anne, you were just too good at explaining everything.
Well, again, we have an expectation that our audience has a pretty good knowledge base generally. So it makes sense that this would be pretty intuitive material for them. And I hope y'all enjoyed it and can make use of it. So good luck, go out there and conquer. And happy to let y'all go a little bit early. So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. And thanks all for joining us. We will end it here.
All right, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.